Before you listen, if you enjoy the stories and want to hear more, then please consider subscribing. Most of you listening aren't subscribed, so please take this time to subscribe. Turn on notifications so you'll never miss a story and be the first to hear. You'll also be supporting me. Thank you. Working as a police officer, you experience a lot of things that most people wouldn't believe. Some days are good and some are bad. But there's one day that will forever be etched into my memory as the worst day of my career. It started like any other day on the force. I had been a cop for about 7 years by then, and was finally getting used to the grind of the job. My partner, Mike, and I had just started our shift, and we were patrolling the streets in our cruiser, joking around and enjoying each other's company. Little did I know that within a few short hours, the day would take a turn that would change my life forever. It was a sweltering summer day, and the streets were bustling with people trying to make the most of the sunshine. We got a call over the radio about a domestic disturbance at a nearby apartment complex. It wasn't an unusual call, but something in the dispatcher's voice made me feel uneasy. We arrived at the scene a few minutes later, and the building manager let us in. As we made our way up the stairs, the smell of cigarette smoke and stale beer filled the air. We hear muffled shouting coming from one of the apartments, and my heart started to race. I had dealt with domestic calls before, but there was something different about this one. I couldn't put my finger on it, but my gut told me that this situation was going to be more dangerous than it seemed. We knocked on the apartment door, and the shouting stopped. After a tense moment, the door opened, revealing a man with bloodshot eyes and a bruised face. He was clearly intoxicated and agitated, but he didn't say anything. Mike tried to de-escalate the situation, asking the man to step outside so we could talk. The man hesitated, glanced back into the apartment, and then reluctantly agreed. I couldn't get the sensation that something was dreadfully wrong when we chatted with the man. The man's explanation didn't add up, and I observed his hands quivering. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and I knew we needed to go inside that flat to make sure everyone was safe. Mike must have felt the same way since he began asking the man for permission to enter the premises. In an instant, the man's attitude shifted. He grew hostile and protective, refusing to let us in. He began yelling insults and got physically aggressive. Mike and I were forced to arrest him for disorderly behavior and obstruction. I was unable to avoid feeling a sense of anxiety as we pulled him into handcuffs. Something was seriously wrong, and we had to figure out what was going on inside that flat. After backup arrived, we were finally able to enter the apartment. The sight that greeted us was something that still haunts me to this day. Blood was smeared across the walls and floors, and the stench of fear and violence was almost unbearable. As we moved through the apartment, I had a feeling that we were about to uncover something truly terrible. That feeling was confirmed when we entered the bedroom. There, lying on the floor, was the lifeless body of a young woman. She had been brutally beaten, and it was clear that she had suffered greatly before her death. I felt sick to my stomach, and the weight of the situation hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just a domestic disturbance. This was a homicide. The following hours were a blur of crime scene investigators, detectives, and officers trying to piece together what had happened. The man we had arrested was a woman's boyfriend, and it was clear that he had been the one to end her life in such a brutal and senseless way. As the investigation continued, we learned that the couple had a long history of domestic violence, and the woman had been too afraid to leave her abuser. I couldn't help but think about all the times we had responded to calls like this, and how we had never been able to save her. It was a heartbreaking realization that weighed heavily on my heart. We had to break the news to the woman's family. Their grief was intense, and I felt responsible in some way. As a police officer, it's our job to protect and serve our community, but in that moment, I felt like we had failed her. It was a crushing weight that I carried with me as we continued our investigation and prepared for the court proceedings that would follow. There's a saying that you never really know what to expect when you put on the uniform and badge each day as a police officer. Some days are uneventful, while others test your limits in ways you never imagined possible. I had my fair share of difficult days on the job, but there's one day in particular that stands out as the most traumatic in my career. I'll never forget the events that unfolded that day and how they changed me as a person and as an officer. It was a chilly autumn morning, the kind of day where the crisp air nipped at your face as you stepped outside. The city was just waking up, with the hum of morning traffic and the distant chatter of people beginning their daily routines. My partner, Jake, and I started our shift with a fresh cup of coffee in hand, as we had for so many years. We had been working together for nearly a decade, and our camaraderie made even the most mundane days enjoyable. We understood each other's strengths and weaknesses, and knew that we had each other's back no matter what. The first part of our shift unfolded like countless others. We responded to the usual calls that came with patrolling a bustling city. A minor car accident at a busy intersection, with the frustrated drivers exchanging information as we took down their statements. A shoplifting incident at a local convenience store, where we found the perpetrator sheepishly trying to hide the stolen goods. And a couple of noise complaints, which led us to a pair of bickering neighbors at a college party that had gotten out of hand. As the morning turned to afternoon, we could feel our stomachs rumbling, signaling that it was time for our lunch break. We often used this time to decompress, sharing stories and joking around to keep our spirits up. Little did we know, however, that today's lunch would be interrupted by a call that would change the course of our day and our lives. The dispatcher informed us that there had been a shooting at a local high school. As we raced to the scene, our adrenaline spiked, and our minds raced with thoughts of what we might find. We had trained for active shooter situations, but nothing can truly prepare you for the reality of confronting such a nightmare. When we arrived at the school, the chaos was overwhelming. Students were streaming out of the building, many of them crying and covered in blood. Teachers were trying to maintain order, but the fear in their eyes was unmistakable. Jake and I exchanged a knowing glance, understanding that we needed to act quickly to protect the lives of the students and staff inside the school. We entered the building, guns drawn and hearts pounding. The halls were eerily quiet, save for the distant sound of gunfire and screaming. We moved cautiously, checking each classroom and hallway for the shooter. We found students and teachers hiding in closets, under desks, and behind locked doors, their faces etched with terror. We did our best to reassure them as we continued our search. As we turned a corner, we saw a trail of blood leading to the school's gymnasium. Steeling ourselves, we entered the room, only to be met with a horrific scene. Several students lay motionless on the floor, their lifeless eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and fear, and it was clear that we had found the epicenter of the tragedy. We continued to search the gym, and finally spotted the shooter. He was just a teenager, not much older than the students he had targeted. He was cornered, and it was clear that he was panicking. We had to make a split-second decision. Do we try to talk him down, or do we neutralize the threat? Knowing that more lives were at stake, we made the difficult decision to use lethal force. The aftermath of the shooting was a blur of sirens, tears, and the weight of a tragedy that was almost too much to bear. We later learned that the shooter had been a troubled student who felt isolated and angry, and had lashed out in the most violent way possible. As we debriefed with our fellow officers, the magnitude of what we had experienced began to sink in. We had faced the unimaginable, and had been forced to make decisions that would haunt us for the rest of our lives. In the days, weeks, and months that followed, I struggled to come to terms with what had happened. I found myself replaying the events of that day over and over in my mind, questioning whether I had made the right choices. I was feeling guilt and helplessness that I couldn't ignore, and it had settled in my chest, and I knew that I needed to find a way to heal. You know, there was this one evening that I'll never forget. My partner, Ubaid, and we're just about to finish our shift, looking forward to getting home and putting our feet up after a long day. The streets were quiet, and the sun was setting, casting an orange glow across the sky. As we were driving back to the station, we received a call from dispatch about a potential suicide attempt on a bridge nearby. The urgency in the dispatcher's voice said it got me hyped and agitated, and I knew we had to act fast. Our relaxed mood instantly evaporated, replaced by the adrenaline of the situation. We quickly changed course and headed straight for the bridge. As we raced to the scene, our minds were racing too. We tried to anticipate what we might encounter and how we would handle it. This wasn't like the other calls we had attended in the past. Someone's life was hanging in the balance, and we had to find the right words and actions to save them. When we arrived at the bridge, we saw a figure standing on the edge, their body tense, and their face a mix of anguish and desperation. Other officers were already there, having cordoned off the area to keep onlookers at bay. Ubaid and I immediately took our position, preparing to engage with a person in distress. While we approached the individual, we could see they were on the verge of tears, their body trembling with emotion. We knew we had to establish a connection with them and earn their trust. I started by introducing myself and Ubaid, letting them know we were there to help and that we understood the pain they were going through. We asked them about their life, their family, and their dreams. As they began to open up, we could see the layers of their pain being revealed. They spoke of heartbreak, loss, and a deep sense of hopelessness that had led them to this point. We listened intently, offering empathy and understanding without judgment. While we spoke, I could see Ubaid subtly inching closer to the person, slowly bridging the gap between them. We knew we had to be cautious and not make any sudden moves that might startle them. As the conversation continued, I could see their demeanor change, their body language softening, and their grip on the railing loosening. We spoke about the people who loved them and the impact their actions would have on those left behind. We reminded them that no matter how dark things seemed, there was always hope and a chance for a better tomorrow. As they listened to our words, I could see a glimmer of hope in their eyes, and I knew we were making progress. By this point, Ubaid had managed to get close enough to the person, and in a swift, carefully planned move, he reached out and grabbed them by the arm. The individual was startled, but didn't resist as Ubaid and I pulled them back over the railing to safety. We held them as they sobbed, their tears a mix of relief and fear. As we escorted them to a nearby ambulance, I could feel this strong sense of gratitude that we had managed to save a life that day. The intensity of the situation had tested our skills and our ability to remain calm under immense pressure. But it also reminded me of the importance of empathy, understanding, and the power of human connection in even the most desperate of circumstances. That evening, as Ubaid and I finally made our way home, we didn't talk much. The events of the day weighed heavily on our minds, a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the impact we could have as police officers. But through it all, I knew that we had made a difference, and that was something I would carry with me for the rest of my career. The next day, as we prepared to start our shift, Ubaid and I shared a quiet moment of reflection. We both knew that we had experienced something profound and life-changing. It was a reminder that our work was not just about enforcing the law or catching criminals, but also about being there for people in their darkest moments, offering them a lifeline when they needed it the most. As the days and weeks went by, we received updates on the person we had saved that night. They had been admitted to a hospital and were receiving the help they needed to start rebuilding their life. Knowing that we had played a part in giving them a second chance was incredibly rewarding. It reinforced our commitment to our work and the community we served. Thanks for listening in. If you like these stories and want to hear more, then please subscribe and like and support this new channel. We have more stories for you to listen to.